The observation deck of the Galactic Council's research station offered a perfect view of the dead world below. ZYX-9 stretched across the viewport like a scar on the universe, barren rock and twisted metal under a sickly yellow sky. The planet had been lifeless for over 3,000 years, ever since the Great Dying wiped out the ancient civilization that once flourished there. Dr. Kethlar adjusted her sensory apparatus and made another note on her data pad. As the Council's leading xenoarchaeologist, she had spent decades studying dead worlds, but ZYX-9 remained a mystery. The ruins suggested an incredibly advanced society, yet they had somehow failed to prevent their own extinction. "Doctor, we have an unusual situation developing." The voice belonged to Commander Veltar, head of station security. The tall, blue-skinned Altiron rarely showed emotion, but today his usually calm demeanor seemed strained. "What kind of situation?" Kethlar asked without looking up from her readings. "A human vessel has entered the system. They're requesting permission to land on ZYX-9. This got Kethlar's attention. Humans were still considered newcomers to galactic society, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most Council species viewed them with a mixture of curiosity and concern. They were unpredictable, often acting on emotion rather than logic. "Did they state their purpose?" she asked. "They claimed to be conducting independent research. The vessel is registered as the New Horizon under Captain Sarah Chun. They have proper documentation, but—" Veltar paused. "But they're bringing a child." Kethlar's four eyes widened in surprise. "A child? To a dead world? A human juvenile, approximately 10 standard years old. The Council protocols are clear about exposing young minds to the psychic residue of extinct civilizations. It could cause permanent psychological damage." Kethlar considered this. The ruins of ZYX-9 did emit strange energy signatures that affected sensitive individuals. Most Council species required mental shielding when exploring the surface, but humans were different. Their minds seemed naturally resistant to psychic interference, though no one understood why. "Have you denied their request?" "Not yet. I wanted your opinion first. You know more about this world than anyone." Kethlar looked back at the dead planet spinning slowly below. 3 years of study had yielded frustratingly few answers. The civilization that built those cities had possessed technology that surpassed even current Council standards, yet something had destroyed them utterly. "Let them land," she decided. "But I want full monitoring of their activities. Doctor, the child, will be the human adult's responsibility. We're observers here, not guardians." An hour later, Kethlar watched through her viewing scope as the human ship descended toward the planet's surface. The New Horizon was smaller than most Council vessels, but it moved with surprising grace. Humans might be young in galactic terms, but they built good ships. The vessel touched down near the largest cluster of ruins, about 2 kilometers from Kethlar's main excavation site. Through her enhanced optics, she could see figures emerging from the airlock. 2 adults in environmental suits, and, between them, a much smaller figure. The child. Even at this distance, Kethlar could tell there was something unusual about the young human. While the adults moved with purpose, checking equipment, and establishing their base camp, the child seemed drawn to something else entirely. The small figure wandered away from the landing site, moving toward a section of ruins that Kethlar's team had marked as structurally unstable. "Commander," she called over the comm system. "Are you monitoring the human activity?" "Yes, Doctor." "The child appears to be exploring." Kethlar adjusted her scope's magnification. The human juvenile had stopped in front of what appeared to be a collapsed wall. But, as she watched, the child did something that made no sense. The young human reached into a supply pack and pulled out what looked like a water container. Then, with deliberate care, the child began pouring water onto a piece of rubble. "What is it doing?" Veltar's voice crackled through the comm. Kethlar increased the magnification further. The child was definitely watering the stone, treating it like some kind of plant. The behavior seemed completely irrational, even by human standards. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think we need to investigate." The next morning, Kethlar assembled her research team for an unscheduled expedition to the surface. Dr. Mordun, her geological specialist, expressed concern about the proximity to the human camp. "Their presence could contaminate our readings," The rock-like granite protested. We've spent years establishing baseline measurements, which is exactly why we need to observe what they're doing, Kevlar replied. If their activities are affecting the ruins, we need to document it. The descent to ZYX-9's surface took 20 minutes in the research shuttle. As they approached the landing zone, Kevlar could see that the humans had established a more extensive camp than she'd expected. Several temporary structures had been erected, along with what appeared to be scientific equipment. But it was the child that drew her attention. The young human was back at the same spot, once again pouring water onto the stones. Up close, Kevlar could see that the child had been at this for some time. The ground around the rubble was dark with moisture, and there were small puddles in the depressions between rocks. Fascinating, whispered Dr. Yilnara, the team's psychologist. The juvenile appears to be exhibiting nurturing behavior toward inanimate objects. They observed from a distance as the child continued the strange ritual. The human adults seemed unconcerned, going about their own research activities while occasionally glancing in the child's direction. Should we make contact? Mordun asked. Before Kevlar could respond, one of the human adults approached their position. The figure removed its helmet, revealing a middle-aged woman with short dark hair and intelligent eyes. Dr. Chun, I presume? Kevlar said, activating her translation device. Sarah Chun, yes. And you must be Dr. Kevlar. Your reputation precedes you, as does yours. Though I confess, I'm puzzled by your research methodology. Sarah glanced back toward the child, who was now carefully arranging small stones around the watered area. You mean Emma? The juvenile appears to be gardening on a dead world. Sarah smiled, an expression that Kevlar had learned indicated human amusement. She thinks she's planting seeds, Sarah explained. I know it sounds crazy, but we found it's best to let her follow her instincts. Instincts? Emma has what humans call special needs. She sees the world differently than most people. Sometimes that difference reveals things the rest of us miss. Kevlar processed this information. Humans were known to value individuals who deviated from normal parameters, unlike most council species who viewed such variations as defects to be corrected. And you believe this difference will contribute to your research? It already has, Sarah said quietly. Tell me, Doctor, how long have you been studying this world? 3 years. And what have you discovered about the cause of the civilization's extinction? Kevlar hesitated. The question touched on her greatest frustration. We know it was sudden. The entire population died within a matter of days. But we found no evidence of disease, natural disaster, or warfare. Have you considered that you might be looking for the wrong thing? Before Kevlar could ask what she meant, a sound echoed across the ruins. It was faint but unmistakable, the sound of cracking stone. Both scientists turned toward the source of the noise. Emma had stopped her watering and was standing perfectly still, her head tilted as if listening to something. Then she began to run. The child moved with surprising speed, darting between fallen pillars and collapsed walls with an almost supernatural awareness of the terrain. Sarah called out, but Emma didn't slow down. Where is she going? Kevlar asked, activating her suit's tracking systems. I don't know, but we need to follow her. The pursuit led them deeper into the ruins than Kevlar had ever ventured. The structures here were older, more deteriorated, and the energy readings were stronger. Her instruments detected psychic resonance that should have been overwhelming for unshielded minds. But Emma seemed unaffected. The child moved through the ancient streets with purpose, occasionally stopping to examine something before continuing on. How is she navigating without instruments? Mordun asked over the comm. I don't think she's navigating, Sarah replied. I think she's following something. They emerged into a vast circular plaza that Kevlar's orbital surveys had identified but never explored. The space was dominated by a massive structure that defied easy categorization, part building, part sculpture, part machine. Emma stopped in the center of the plaza and looked up at the structure with an expression of wonder. What is that thing? Yilnara whispered. Before anyone could speculate, Emma did something that made everyone freeze in shock. She began to glow. The light emanated from the child's skin, a soft blue radiance that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. As the glow intensified, the ancient structure began to respond. Panels that had been dark for millennia flickered to life. Crystalline formations embedded in the walls started to hum with energy. And throughout the plaza, small green shoots began pushing up through cracks in the stone pavement. Plants. Real, living plants were sprouting from dead rock. Impossible, more Dunn breathed. The soil composition won't support organic life. But the evidence was undeniable. As Emma's glow reached its peak, the entire plaza transformed. Vines crept up the walls of the structure, flowers bloomed in impossible colors, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with vitality. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the phenomenon stopped. Emma's glow faded, and she collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. Sarah rushed to the child's side, while the research team stood in stunned silence. The plants remained, proof that what they'd witnessed was real. What just happened? Kevlar asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked up from Emma, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. I think, she said slowly, my daughter just figured out what killed this civilization. The implications of what they'd witnessed hung in the air like a charged particle field. Kevlar's instruments were registering energy patterns that shouldn't exist, and the sudden appearance of plant life challenged everything she thought she knew about ZYX-9. We need to get back to the research station, she announced. All of us. Now. But, as they prepared to leave the plaza, Emma looked back at the glowing structure with an expression that seemed far too knowing for a 10-year-old child. It's not dead, she said quietly. It was just sleeping. And, in the depths of the ancient building, the emergency council meeting convened 3 hours after the surface expedition's return. Representatives from 12 council species gathered in the station's main conference chamber, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, hums, and synthesized speech. Kevlar stood before the assembled delegates, her research data displayed on floating holographic screens. The readings showed energy spikes across 17 major ruin sites, with the central plaza showing the highest activity levels. The activation appears to be spreading, she explained to the increasingly agitated assembly. What began as localized plant growth has expanded into a planet-wide phenomenon. Ambassador Trillex of the hegemony species leaned forward, his crystalline form catching the chamber's light. And you believe this was triggered by a human child? The correlation is undeniable. The moment the juvenile made physical contact with the central structure, the entire network came online. A chorus of concerned murmurs filled the chamber. The hegemony had always been suspicious of human involvement in galactic affairs, and this incident would only fuel their paranoia. Where is the human vessel now? Asked Counselor Zarneth, the insectoid representative from the Hive Collective. Still on the surface, Commander Veltar reported. They've refused our requests to return to orbit. Then, we bring them up by force, Trillex declared. This situation requires immediate containment. With respect, Ambassador, Kevlar interjected. We don't yet understand what we're dealing with. Hostile action could make things worse. Worse than a dead world coming back to life. Trillex's harmonic voice rose to an angry crescendo. Do you have any idea what the implications of this could be? Before Kevlar could respond, the chamber's communication systems activated. An incoming transmission from the planet's surface appeared on the main screen, showing Dr. Sarah Chen's face. Council representatives, Sarah said formally. I'm requesting an immediate audience. Dr. Chun. Ambassador Trillex replied coldly. You will return to orbit immediately for debriefing. I'm afraid that's not possible. We've made a discovery that requires council attention, but it must be discussed on the surface. You are in no position to make demands, human. Sarah's expression remained calm, but Kevlar could detect the steel beneath her diplomatic tone. I'm not making demands. I'm offering information that could change everything we know about galactic history. The transmission cut off, leaving the council chamber in heated debate. Some delegates wanted to send security forces to the surface, while others argued for a more cautious approach. Kevlar found herself in an impossible position. As the expedition's scientific leader, she was responsible for any decisions that affected the mission. But, as the situation escalated beyond normal research parameters, political considerations were taking precedence over scientific inquiry. I volunteer to return to the surface, she announced, cutting through the arguments. The chamber fell silent. Dr. Kevlar, Counselor Zarneth said carefully, The risk assessment shows that we're dealing with unknown variables. The only way to understand what's happening is to study it directly. Ambassador Trillex's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. Absolutely not. We cannot risk exposing more personnel to whatever influence that child is exerting. Then, what do you propose? Orbital bombardment. The suggestion sent shockwaves through the assembly. Several delegates began speaking at once, their various languages creating a cacophony of protest and debate. Enough, Commander Veltar said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Dr. Kevlar is right. We need more information before making any drastic decisions. I'll accompany Dr. Kevlar, offered Dr. Yilnara, the team psychologist. If the human child is indeed affecting the planet through some unknown ability, I may be able to provide insights. The debate continued for another hour before a compromise was reached. A small team would return to the surface under heavy monitoring, with strict orders to report any unusual phenomena immediately. As they prepared for departure, Kevlar couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something fundamental about the situation. The readings from the planet's surface showed patterns that suggested purpose rather than random activation. Whatever was happening on ZYX-9, it wasn't accidental. The descent to the planet's surface revealed dramatic changes since their morning departure. Where once there had been only barren rock and ancient ruins, now there were patches of green visible from orbit. The transformation was accelerating. Their shuttle landed near the human camp, where Sarah Chun and her colleague Dr. Marcus Webb were waiting. Between them stood Emma, the child whose actions had triggered this unprecedented situation. Up close, Kevlar could see that Emma appeared completely normal. There was no visible sign of the energy that had emanated from her in the plaza. She looked like any other human juvenile, small, curious, and slightly bored by the adult conversation happening around her. Dr. Chun, Kevlar said as she approached. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. The pleasure is mine. I think you're going to find this very interesting. Sarah led them away from the camp toward a section of ruins that hadn't been there that morning. The structures seemed to have grown from the ground itself, their architecture seamlessly blending with the ancient foundations. These buildings, Dr. Webb explained, appeared approximately 2 hours after our expedition to the Central Plaza. They're not rebuilt ruins. They're completely new construction, but they match the architectural patterns of the original civilization. Kevlar ran her scanner over the nearest wall. The readings were impossible. The materials showed characteristics of both organic and inorganic matter, as if the building was somehow alive. How is this possible? We think the planet itself is a kind of biological machine, Sarah said. The original inhabitants didn't just live on ZYX-9, they were part of it. Dr. Yilnara stepped forward, her interest clearly piqued. You're suggesting a symbiotic relationship? More than that. We believe the entire planet was designed as a living organism, with the civilization acting as its consciousness. The implications were staggering. Kevlar had studied dozens of extinct civilizations, but she'd never encountered anything like this. If that's true, she said slowly, then what caused the extinction? Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances before looking at Emma, who was sitting on a nearby stone and drawing patterns in the dirt with her finger. We think they lost the ability to connect with the planet, Sarah said. Some kind of evolutionary change that severed the link between the biological and technological components of their society. And Emma can somehow re-establish that connection? Emma doesn't see boundaries the way the rest of us do, Marcus explained. When she looks at a stone, she doesn't see dead matter. She sees potential. When she waters it like a seed, she's not being childish. She's recognizing what it could become. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Emma stood up and walked over to the group. She looked directly at Kevlar with eyes that seemed far older than her apparent age. The sleeping ones are waking up, she said simply. They're happy someone remembered how to sing to them. Sing to them? Emma nodded seriously. Everything has a song. The rocks, the air, the old buildings. Most people forgot how to listen, but I can still hear it. Kevlar knelt down to Emma's level. Can you teach us to hear it too? The child considered this question with the gravity of an experienced philosopher. Maybe, she said finally. But first you have to stop being afraid of things being different than you thought they were. Before anyone could respond to this observation, The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. The sensation was subtle at first, but it quickly intensified into a rhythmic pulse that seemed to emanate from deep within the planet. "What's happening?" Dr. Yilnara asked, consulting her instruments. Emma tilted her head, listening to something only she could hear. "They're calling a meeting," she announced. "All the old places are talking to each other." Across the horizon, the ancient ruins were lighting up one by one. Streams of energy flowed between the structures, creating a network of connections that spanned the entire visible landscape. "We need to contact the station immediately," Kethlar said, activating her communication device. But before she could establish a connection, Emma grabbed her arm. "Wait," the child said urgently. "They want to show you something first." The energy streams converging on their location were growing brighter. As they watched, the flowing lights began to coalesce into patterns, complex geometric shapes that seemed to carry meaning beyond mere decoration. "It's beautiful," Dr. Yilnara whispered. "It's a message," Sarah said, studying the patterns with growing excitement. "Emma, can you understand what they're trying to say?" Emma watched the light display with intense concentration. When she finally spoke, her words sent chills through everyone present. "They want to come home," she said. "The sleeping ones want to come home, but they can't remember how they used to be. They need help remembering." "Who are the sleeping ones?" Kethlar asked. Emma pointed upward, toward the stars barely visible in the planet's yellow sky. "The children who went away," she said. "The ones who forgot how to sing." The implications of Emma's words hit Kethlar like a physical blow. If she was interpreting correctly, the child was suggesting that the extinct civilization of ZYX-9 wasn't dead at all. They had simply left the planet and lost their connection to it. And if that was true, then, somewhere in the galaxy, the descendants of ZYX-9's inhabitants were still alive. The question was, did they remember where they came from? As if in response to this thought, the communication arrays on the research station high above began detecting incoming signals from across the galaxy. Ships were changing course toward ZYX-9, drawn by transmissions that most species couldn't even detect. The sleeping planet was calling its children home, and they were beginning to answer. But not all of those responding to the call would welcome what they found when they arrived. Some had spent millennia forgetting their origins, building new civilizations and new identities. The awakening of ZYX-9 would force them. The first ships arrived within 12 hours of the planetary awakening. Kethlar watched from the observation deck as vessels of unknown design dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Her instruments couldn't identify their origins. The ships didn't match any known galactic database, yet their technology appeared remarkably advanced. 17 vessels so far, Commander Veltar reported, is usually calm demeanor showing signs of strain. All different configurations, but they're maintaining position at the system's edge. Any response to our hails? None. They're just waiting. Dr. Yilnara joined them at the viewing port, her expression troubled. I'm detecting unusual psychic emanations from the newcomers. It's as if they're experiencing collective confusion. Confusion about what? I think they're trying to remember something they've forgotten. On the planet's surface, Emma continued her strange communion with the awakening ruins. Sarah had established a direct communication link with the research station, allowing them to monitor the child's activities in real time. The transformation of ZYX-9 was accelerating at an unprecedented rate. Entire city districts that had been rubble that morning were now showing signs of reconstruction. But it wasn't human or council technology performing the repairs. The planet itself seemed to be healing. "Dr. Kethlar," Sarah's voice crackled through the communication system. "You need to see this." The transmission switched to Emma's location, where the child was standing in what appeared to be a vast garden that definitely hadn't existed the day before. Plants that defied classification grew in impossible abundance, their leaves catching light in ways that suggested they weren't entirely organic. But it was the structure at the garden's center that took Kethlar's breath away. A massive tree rose from the earth, its trunk easily 50 meters in diameter. But this was no ordinary plant. The bark was composed of the same crystalline material found in the ancient ruins, and its branches held not leaves, but geometric patterns that pulsed with soft light. Emma stood before this impossible tree with her hands pressed against its surface, her expression one of intense concentration. "She's been like this for 3 hours," Sarah reported. The tree appeared around her shortly after the first ships arrived. "Has she said anything?" "Only that she's helping them remember." As they watched, the patterns on the tree's branches began to shift and flow. The lights grew brighter, pulsing in rhythm with Emma's heartbeat. And, in space above, something extraordinary happened. The waiting ships began to move. "They're entering the inner system," Veltar announced, his voice tight with tension. "All vessels are heading directly for ZYX-9. Have they responded to our communications yet?" "Negative. But we're picking up transmissions between the vessels. The language is unknown, but the pattern suggests they're sharing information." Kevlar activated her personal communication device and connected to the surface team. "Dr. Chun, we have incoming vessels. Unknown configuration and intent. Do you require evacuation?" Sarah's response came after a long pause. "Emma says they're not dangerous. She says they're just lost." "Lost?" She can hear them crying. Marcus Webb's voice joined the conversation. "According to Emma, they've been searching for home for thousands of years, but forgot what they were looking for." The implication sent a chill through Kevlar's scientific mind. If Emma was correct, then the approaching ships contained the descendants of ZYX-9's original inhabitants, beings who had left their homeworld so long ago that they'd forgotten their own origins. "Dr. Kevlar, Dr. Yilnara called urgently. I'm reading massive psychic resonance from the surface. The tree Emma is connected to. It's broadcasting on frequencies I didn't know existed." Through the viewports, they could see new lights appearing across ZYX-9's surface. The network of energy connections between ruins was expanding, creating patterns that extended beyond the horizon. "It's a beacon," Kevlar realized. "The planet is calling them home." The first ship to reach orbital distance was unlike anything in Council records. Its hull seemed to shift between solid matter and pure energy, and its shape defied geometric logic. Yet despite its alien nature, there was something hauntingly familiar about its design. "Incoming transmission," the communication officer announced. "Audio only, unknown language." The signal that filled the observation deck was barely recognizable as speech. It sounded like singing mixed with electronic harmonics, creating a melody that somehow conveyed meaning beyond words. But Emma, far below on the planet's surface, responded immediately. The child's voice, amplified by the crystalline tree she was connected to, answered the transmission in the same impossible language. Her words flowed like music, carrying emotional content that transcended linguistic barriers. "She's speaking their language," Sarah reported in amazement. "But I know for a fact Emma has never heard anything like that before." "She's not speaking it," Dr. Yilnara said quietly. "She's remembering it." The exchange between Emma and the ship continued for several minutes, with other vessels joining the conversation. The child seemed to be conducting some kind of symphony, with each ship contributing its own harmonic patterns to the growing composition. Then, suddenly, the music stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background hum of the station's systems seemed muted. When the first ship finally spoke again, its transmission came through the standard Council translation protocols. "We remember," the voice said, filled with wonder and ancient sadness. "We remember what we lost." Commander Veltar stepped forward. "This is Research Station Terminus. Please identify yourself and state your intentions." "We are the children of the deep song," came the reply. "We are the ones who left when the music died. We have been searching for the harmony we lost." "You're from ZYX-9? ZYX-9? The voice seemed confused. "No, we are from VelTHYSS, the living world. The world that sang to us in dreams we could never quite remember." Kevlar felt pieces of an ancient puzzle clicking into place. "You've been in exile for 3,000 years. Exile." The word carried infinite sadness. "Yes. When the song stopped, we could no longer hear the world's voice. We thought it had died, so we took to the void, searching for new songs among the stars." "But the world never died," Dr. Yilnara said gently. "It was waiting for someone who could help it remember how to sing." On the surface, Emma stepped back from the crystalline tree, her task apparently complete. The child looked exhausted, but satisfied, like someone who had just finished a very important job. "The sleeping ones remember now," she announced to the surface team. They can come home if they want to. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, concern evident in her voice. Are you okay, sweetheart? Emma nodded, though she swayed slightly from fatigue. It's hard work, helping people remember things they forgot. But it feels good when they do. The first landing craft began its descent toward the planet's surface an hour later. Keflar and her team watched nervously as the alien vessel approached the ruins, uncertain what to expect. The craft that touched down near the crystalline tree bore no resemblance to any known technology. It seemed to be grown rather than built, its organic curves suggesting biological origins. When its airlock opened, the beings who emerged confirmed Keflar's suspicions. They were humanoid in basic structure, but their relationship with technology was unlike anything in Council records. Their bodies incorporated both organic and crystalline elements, creating beings who existed somewhere between biology and living machinery. But it was their reaction to ZYX-9's transformed landscape that proved most striking. The moment their feet touched the planet's surface, the newcomers began to weep. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming joy and relief. They moved through the growing gardens like people returning to a childhood home after decades of absence, touching plants and stones with reverent recognition. One of them, apparently a leader, approached Emma where she sat resting against the base of the crystalline tree. The being was tall and graceful, its form shifting subtly between flesh and living crystal. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate with the planet itself. "Little singer," it said, kneeling to Emma's level. "You have given us back our souls." Emma looked at the being with the serious expression she wore when discussing important things. "I just watered the stone," she said simply. "It wanted to grow, so I helped it." The being's crystalline features shifted into what might have been a smile. "Yes, you saw the seed within the stone. You heard the song that the rest of us had forgotten." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, joining the conversation. "Now we remember," the being replied. "We remember who we were, and who we chose to become. Some of us will return to VelTHYSS and help it bloom again. Others will continue their journeys among the stars, carrying the world's song to new places. And some," another voice added, "will stay to learn from the little singer who taught us that even the oldest stones can remember how to grow." As the reunification of the exiled children with their homeworld continued, Keflar found herself reconsidering everything she thought she knew about extinction, evolution, and the nature of civilization itself. Some species died and were gone forever. Others, it seemed, just forgot who they were until someone helped them remember. The diplomatic crisis began 3 days after the first children of the Deep Song made planetfall. Ambassador Trillex had spent those days in increasingly urgent communication with the Hegemony High Command, and their response had been swift and uncompromising. A Hegemony battle fleet was en route to ZYX-9, with orders to contain the anomalous situation by any means necessary. Keflar learned of this development during an emergency briefing that left her feeling sick with dread. 12 heavy cruisers and a dreadnought, Commander Veltar reported grimly. "They'll arrive within 18 hours. "On what grounds?" Dr. Yilnara demanded. "This is clearly a first contact situation. The protocols don't cover planetary resurrection," Trillex interrupted coldly. "The Hegemony High Command has classified this as a potential contamination event." Keflar struggled to maintain her composure. Contamination of what? The Galactic Order. These beings claim to have been spacefaring for 3 millennia, yet they appear in no historical records. Their technology defies classification, and they were awakened by a human child with unexplained abilities. "So you're planning to destroy them?" "We're planning to study them. Under proper containment protocols." The euphemism didn't disguise the reality. Keflar had seen hegemony containment protocols before. They involved quarantine facilities that subjects rarely left alive. "I'm returning to the surface," she announced. "Absolutely not. All council personnel are restricted to the station until the situation is resolved." "Resolved? You mean until you've committed genocide against a species that's done nothing but try to go home?" Trillex's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. "Your emotional attachment to these creatures is compromising your judgment, Dr. Keflar. Perhaps humans are not as immune to alien influence as we believed. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kethlar realized that her defense of the children of the Deep Song was being interpreted as evidence of mental contamination. "Commander Veltar," she said formally, "I'm invoking my rights under the Scientific Independence Charter. As lead researcher on this mission, I have authority to continue observations until definitive conclusions can be reached." Veltar looked uncomfortable. The charter was rarely invoked, but it did grant considerable autonomy to scientific expeditions in unprecedented situations. "Doctor, the risks are part of scientific exploration. If we abandon objective research in favor of fear-based decision-making, we cease to be scientists." The debate continued for another hour, but Kethlar's legal position was sound. She would be allowed to return to the surface with a small team, but only under heavy monitoring and with strict orders to evacuate at the first sign of contamination. As she prepared for what might be her final expedition to ZYX-9, Kethlar couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial about the situation. The descent to the planet's surface revealed even more dramatic changes. What had been ruins and scattered gardens 3 days ago was now a thriving ecosystem that defied every law of xenobiology Kethlar knew. The cities were rebuilding themselves with impossible speed, but not according to their original design. The new architecture incorporated elements that seemed designed for multiple species, structures that could accommodate beings of different sizes, atmospheric requirements, and sensory capabilities. "It's like they're preparing for visitors," Dr. Mordun observed as their shuttle approached the landing zone. "Or refugees," Yilnara added quietly. The human camp had been expanded to accommodate the growing number of researchers and diplomats arriving to study the phenomenon. But it was the area around the crystalline tree that drew Kethlar's immediate attention. Emma was there, of course, but she was no longer alone. Dozens of beings from various arriving ships had gathered around her, forming what could only be described as a school. The child sat cross-legged at the base of the great tree, surrounded by entities whose forms ranged from nearly human to utterly alien. All of them seemed to be listening intently as she explained something that involved a collection of stones, seedlings, and small containers of water. "What is she doing?" Mordun asked. Sarah Chun approached their landing party, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Teaching," she said simply. The returnees discovered that many of them had partially lost their connection to the planet's consciousness. Emma is helping them re-establish the link. How? The same way she awakened the planet. By believing that stones can grow if you care for them properly. Kethlar watched as Emma demonstrated her technique to a being that looked like a cross between a tree and a geometric crystal formation. The child's movements were patient and gentle as she showed how to pour water on apparently lifeless rocks. "But they're not really stones," Kethlar said, understanding beginning to dawn. "No," Sarah agreed. "They're seeds. Or maybe eggs. The planetary consciousness uses them as nodes for expansion and communication. But the process requires a specific type of faith, for lack of a better word. Faith. The belief that potential can become reality. That what appears dead might simply be dormant. It's a very human trait, actually." Kethlar processed this information with growing wonder and dread. If Emma was teaching other species to think like humans, the implications for galactic society were staggering. "Dr. Chun," she said carefully, "are you aware that a hegemony battle fleet is approaching this system?" Sarah's expression darkened. "We detected their approach this morning. The returnees are concerned." "Concerned how?" "Some of them remember the hegemony from before their exile. Apparently, the crystalline species were among those who drove the children of the Deep Song from their homeworld originally." The revelation hit Kethlar like a physical blow. The hegemony's ancestors had been responsible for the original extinction event that created the mystery of ZYX-9. They were trying to prevent exactly what's happening now, she realized. The return of a species that could teach others to think beyond traditional limitations, yes. Before Kethlar could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. "Dr. Kethlar, I presume?" The speaker was one of the children of the Deep Song, its form shifting gracefully between organic and crystalline states. Unlike the others Kethlar had observed, This being seemed somehow more solid, more present. I am Symphon, first singer of the returned. We have been hoping to speak with you. About what? About the choice your species is about to face. Symphon gestured toward Emma, who was now showing her mixed species class how to listen for the songs that stones supposedly sang when they were ready to grow. The little singer has awakened more than our homeworld, Symphon explained. She has demonstrated abilities that could fundamentally alter how consciousness interacts with matter throughout the galaxy. And the hegemony wants to prevent that? The hegemony believes in order, hierarchy, and the immutability of natural laws. We represent chaos, growth, and the possibility that reality is far more flexible than most species believe. Kethlar watched as Emma successfully helped the young Ritterney coax a flowering vine from what had appeared to be solid stone. The child's technique seemed to involve nothing more complex than gentle attention and absolute faith in positive outcomes. What choice are humans facing? Whether to stand with us when the hegemony arrives, or to retreat into the safety of established galactic order. And if we choose to retreat, then the little singer will likely be taken for study. Our people will be scattered again, and the galaxy will continue operating under the assumption that consciousness and matter are separate, immutable categories. And if we choose to stand with you, then we discover together what becomes possible when an entire species refuses to accept that stones cannot grow. The weight of Symphon's words settled on Kethlar like a heavy cloak. The children of the deep song weren't just asking for sanctuary. They were offering humanity a role in reshaping the fundamental nature of reality itself. I need to speak with my people, she said finally. Of course, but be aware that time grows short. The hegemony fleet will arrive within hours, and their intentions have not changed since they drove us into exile 3,000 years ago. As Symphon departed, Kethlar found herself standing at what might be the most important crossroads in human history. The choice wasn't just about helping refugees or defying the hegemony. It was about whether humanity would embrace its unique perspective as a force for change in the galaxy, or retreat into the safety of conformity. Emma, meanwhile, had moved on to teaching her class about the difference between watering stones that wanted to become flowers and watering stones that wanted to become trees. You have to listen to what they want to be, she explained seriously to her attentive audience. If you try to make a stone be something it doesn't want to be, it won't grow at all. The hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a dark storm cloud against the star-filled sky. Kethlar watched from the observation deck of the research station as 12 massive vessels assumed attack formation around ZYX-9. The dreadnought at their center was larger than some space stations, its crystalline hull reflecting the planet's newly vibrant surface like a cold mirror. They're demanding immediate surrender of all human personnel and the entities currently occupying the planet, Commander Veltar reported, his voice carefully neutral. And our response? Ambassador Trillex has assured them of full cooperation. Kethlar closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 3,000 years of galactic history pressing down on her shoulders. The same pattern was about to repeat itself. The children of the deep song would be scattered to the void again. Their homeworld would be sterilized, and the universe would return to its comfortable, predictable order, unless someone chose to break the pattern. Commander, she said quietly, how many crew members on this station are from species other than the hegemony? Veltar considered the question carefully. Approximately 60%. Why? Because I think it's time we remembered that the Council was supposed to represent all species, not just the ones who got here first. Before Veltar could respond, Kethlar's communication device activated with an incoming signal from the planet's surface. Sarah Chen's face appeared on the small screen, but she wasn't calling from the human camp. Behind her, Kethlar could see the impossible architecture of one of the newly grown cities, its organic curves and crystalline formations creating a backdrop that defied rational explanation. Dr. Kethlar, Sarah said without preamble, Emma wants to talk to the hegemony. That's absolutely not happening. The situation is dangerous enough already. I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you of her decision. The screen shifted to show Emma standing at the base of the great crystalline tree, which had grown significantly since Kethlar's last visit to the surface. The child was surrounded by dozens of the children of the deep song, their forms creating a living mandala of organic and technological beauty. But it was Emma herself who drew Kethlar's attention. The child seemed somehow larger than her small physical form should have allowed, as if she was connected to something vast and patient and utterly confident in its own existence. "Hello, Dr. Kethlar," Emma said, looking directly into the camera with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "I know you're worried about what's going to happen, but it's going to be okay." "Emma, sweetheart, there are very dangerous people coming, I know. They're scared because they think if stones can learn to grow, then maybe all the rules they made up aren't really rules after all." The child's simple explanation cut through layers of political complexity to expose the fundamental issue at stake. The hegemony's fear wasn't really about alien contamination or galactic security. It was about the possibility that the universe might be far more flexible and full of potential than they were comfortable admitting. "But, Emma," Kethlar said gently, "some rules exist for good reasons. And some people are dangerous because they don't want to change." "I know," Emma replied with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a confused adult. "But that doesn't mean we should stop believing that things can grow." The transmission expanded to include Simfon and several other children of the Deep Song leaders. "Dr. Kethlar," Simfon said formally, "we have a proposal for the Council. With your permission, we would like to demonstrate that our existence poses no threat to galactic stability." "What kind of demonstration?" "We want to show them what becomes possible when consciousness and matter learn to cooperate instead of compete." Before Kethlar could ask for clarification, the children of the Deep Song began to sing. The sound that emerged from the assembled beings was unlike anything in Kethlar's experience. It was harmony and melody and rhythm all at once, but it was also something more fundamental, a kind of musical mathematics that seemed to describe the basic relationships between energy, matter, and consciousness. And, as they sang, the planet began to respond. Through the viewports of the research station, Kethlar could see light spreading across ZYX-9's surface like aurora made solid. The energy flowed along the network connections between cities, creating patterns of incredible complexity and beauty. But the most remarkable thing was what happened to the space around the planet. The very fabric of local space-time began to shimmer and flow, creating visible currents of possibility that extended throughout the star system. The hegemony ships, caught in these currents, found their weapons systems mysteriously inoperative. "What are they doing?" Commander Veltar asked, his voice filled with wonder and alarm. "I think," Kethlar said slowly, "they're demonstrating that reality is much more cooperative than the hegemony believes." The lead hegemony vessel began broadcasting on all frequencies, its message filled with outrage and barely controlled panic. "Unknown entities, cease your reality manipulation immediately. Your actions constitute a direct threat to galactic security." Emma's voice, somehow amplified by the planetary consciousness itself, responded with the kind of gentle correction usually reserved for confused children. "We're not threatening anybody," she said patiently. "We're just showing you that there are more ways to solve problems than fighting. Your existence violates the fundamental principles of natural order." "No," Emma replied with the absolute certainty that only children possess when they know they're right. "Your rules violate the fundamental principles of natural growth." The exchange might have continued indefinitely, but at that moment, something unprecedented happened. Other voices began joining the conversation. Dr. Yilnara was the first, speaking from her position on the research station. "This is Dr. Yilnara of the Telepathic Council. I can confirm that the entities on ZYX-9 pose no mental threat to galactic populations." Then, Dr. Mordun added his voice. "Geological Survey Corps endorses the planetary restoration techniques demonstrated by the returnees. Their methods could benefit countless worlds." More voices followed, scientists, diplomats, and researchers from dozens of species, all choosing to stand with the children of the Deep Song against hegemony dominance. But the voice that surprised everyone was Commander Veltar's. Commander Veltar, Alteron Military Command, requesting permission to establish formal diplomatic relations with the children of the Deep Song. The silence that followed this declaration was absolute. Ambassador Trillex's response, when it finally came, was filled with crystalline fury. This is treason. All personnel supporting these entities will face immediate arrest. On what charges? Kevlar asked, stepping forward to join the growing coalition. Scientific inquiry? Diplomatic outreach? Refusing to commit genocide. These creatures represent chaos and disorder. No, Emma said, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the planet itself. We represent the idea that order and chaos can dance together instead of fighting. To demonstrate this point, the child of the deep song began to sing again. But, this time, they were joined by voices from across the system. The crews of the research station began humming along with the alien melody. The scientists on the planet's surface added their voices to the growing chorus. Even some of the hegemony ship crews, despite their officers' orders, found themselves swept up in the music. The song that emerged was impossible and beautiful, a harmony between dozens of species, countless individuals, and the living consciousness of an awakening world. It was the sound of cooperation made audible, of differences becoming strengths rather than divisions. And, as the song reached its crescendo, something miraculous happened. The space around ZYX-9 began to bloom, not with flowers or trees, but with pure possibility. The energy currents that had been flowing around the planet condensed into structures of living light, buildings and gardens and art installations that existed in dimensions beyond the purely physical. The hegemony fleet found itself surrounded by a city made of crystallized music, where the laws of physics were more like friendly suggestions than absolute rules. Impossible, Trillex whispered, his voice carrying over the open communication channels. That's what makes it wonderful, Emma replied with the wisdom of someone who had never learned to accept limitations. Possible things are boring. Impossible things are where all the fun happens. The standoff that followed lasted for hours. The hegemony fleet remained trapped in the reality-shifting currents around ZYX-9, unable to use their weapons, but unwilling to retreat. Finally, it was one of the younger hegemony officers who broke the deadlock. Fleet Commander, came a voice from one of the cruisers, requesting permission to try the stone-growing technique. The request sent shockwaves through the command structure, but it also revealed what Kevlar had suspected all along. Curiosity and wonder weren't species-specific traits. Within hours, landing craft were shuttling between the hegemony ships and the planet's surface. Not all of the crystalline species were ready to abandon their rigid worldview, but enough were willing to learn that the balance of power had fundamentally shifted. Emma, meanwhile, had established a new teaching area specifically for students who were afraid that stones couldn't really grow. It's okay to be scared, she told a group that included hegemony officers, council researchers, and children of the deep song. I was scared the first time I tried it too. But if you don't try, you'll never find out what wants to grow. Kevlar watched from a nearby observation point as beings from across the galaxy knelt together in the dirt, carefully watering stones while a human child taught them that the difference between possible and impossible was usually just a matter of perspective. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting a very long time for someone to remember that even the oldest, coldest stones might just be seeds that had forgotten how to dream of growing. And sometimes, all they needed was someone who believed in them enough to offer a little water and a lot of patience. The children of the deep song were finally home. But, more importantly, the galaxy had learned that home was something you could grow anywhere, as long as you remembered that stones and stars and hearts all shared the same fundamental desire to become something beautiful. Emma, having successfully taught representatives from 17 different species how to properly water apparently lifeless rocks, announced that she was tired and would like a snack. Some things, apparently, remained wonderfully, impossibly human, even when you were reshaping the nature of reality itself. And that, Kevlar thought as she watched the child skip away between gardens that defied every law of xenobotany, was probably exactly as it should be. Watching the child work, Kevlar realized that Emma had already made the choice that her entire species would soon have to face. The question was whether the adults would be brave enough to follow where a 10-year-old was leading. The hegemony fleet would arrive in less than 12 hours, and, with it, the moment when humanity would discover what kind of species it wanted to become. Kethlar activated her communication device to contact the research station. It was time to call an emergency meeting of her own. The galaxy was about to change, one way or another. The only question was whether that change would come through growth or through violence. And, in a garden that hadn't existed a week ago, a human child continued teaching stones how to remember that they had always been seeds. Emma, meanwhile, had found a comfortable spot in the shade of the crystalline tree and was teaching a group of young returned exiles how to properly water stones. You have to believe they want to grow, she explained seriously. If you don't believe it, they won't either. Watching the child work, Kethlar realized that Emma's greatest gift wasn't her ability to communicate with alien consciousness or awaken dormant planetary systems. It was her absolute faith in the possibility of impossible things. And, sometimes, Kethlar was learning, that was all the magic the universe required. To confront questions they might not be ready to answer. Emma seemed to sense the approaching complexity of the situation. She looked up at the adults around her with an expression of calm determination. It's going to be okay, she said quietly. Sometimes things have to get confusing before they can get better. Kethlar hoped the child was right, because the confusion was just beginning. Something that had slumbered for 3,000 years began to stir. The return journey to the research station passed in tense silence. Kethlar's mind raced as she tried to process what she'd witnessed. A human child had somehow activated technology that her best scientists couldn't even identify, let alone understand. As their shuttle docked with the station, Veltar was waiting in the bay with a full security detail. "Doctor, we need to talk," he said grimly. "Something is happening on the planet's surface." Through the station's main viewing ports, they could see new lights flickering across ZYX-9's dark surface. The dead world was waking up, and no one knew what that meant for the future of the galaxy.